And I can't think of a better person, because Rupert, as you said at the launch of this book, you were party to the dinner conversations that used to animate this very space. It seems fitting that we should continue that in some small way. I thought it would be good to begin tonight with a wonderful quote I came across recently from the last interview Gore Vidal gave before he died to the New York Times. And in retrospect, it's a very precious document. He tells the correspondent who's come to talk to him, he says, "I'm shocked by the literary figures of our day who go from university to university and have no lives in the world." Then he struggles to remember a line from Goethe. He says, what was Goethe's line? "Talent is formed in quiet, character in the stream of the world." And then in a very Vidalian flourish, he adds, "I have been water skiing on the stream of the world." I read that line and immediately I thought of Rupert, who, if anyone in Guyana has skied on the stream of the world, it is him. And I just thought we'd begin with getting a sense of how you opted out of going from university to university. I mean, you were at Cornell, had a distinguished career ahead of you, had you wished to take it. And instead you've taken a very curious and brilliant and unpredictable cultural arc from there to here. I just thought, could you give us a sketch of where you've been?
Right. Well, after I completed my studies at Cornell, I stayed on in the Department of Comparative Literature, and it was a graduate department, teaching very bright people, and I was teaching mostly European literature at the time. This was a period, the 70s, early 70s. I had study leave coming up in 1973, 74, and I decided to take it in Portugal, because the Portuguese Revolution had just happened.
Right.
I was very curious, so I piled my car full of books and drove to Lisbon and spent the entire summer mostly on the streets. It was a very, very energizing experience. I was there at Cornell, I had Marxist reading classes and that kind of thing. But to be in the middle of a revolution in Lisbon was really, for me, a life-changing situation. I came back to Cornell really dissatisfied with the peace and tranquility of the university. And at that time, Walter was a visiting professor at the Ujamaa Center in Cornell, and he would be coming up to do occasional lectures and spending some time. We saw a lot of each other on those visits. And around 1974, 75, he told me that things had sufficiently changed in Guyana for there to be a possibility for progressive politics. I had left here in 1962 fairly disenchanted. I had been fairly politically active as a young person. In fact, I told someone the other day that the first election campaign I participated in was in 1961, when as a young man I was campaigning for the PPP, and was in this vehicle that went into Newtown and ended up in a cul-de-sac. And people came out in their numbers. And it's the first time I'd been actively beaten with a broom. This was the PNC symbol of the day. And really, to be beaten with a pointer broom by several people at the same time was really quite an experience. But anyway, I was talking with Walter. After I left in 61, the 62 Victory March really, I think, I found a very, very disturbing thing. And what happened in 62, the burning of the city in February, and the turmoil of the period. I left convinced that the place had nowhere to go, that the society was so riven, And the disasters that followed in the 60s, when I was, at this time I had left, I'd gone up to Cambridge, and so could only read what was happening. But the fact is that what was happening was so discouraging that I, in fact, never contemplated returning to Guyana, because I felt that the possibility for progressive politics was really did not exist. Walter, it turned out, felt much the same way. And when we met at Cornell, and he actually came to a couple of my reading classes, my reading sessions, and told me after one of them that I know that most of those people who were in my reading group would probably end up with the CIA, and so on. So he eventually convinced me that things had changed sufficiently in Guyana. The WPA was just being activated, and essentially persuaded me to come home. I came back in '76. Prior to coming back, I was very active on the campus with various things. I remember that period there was the dismissal of the person in charge of minority scholarships, and this led to enormous turmoil and occupation of the administration building. I was teaching the Marxism course on the campus, which attracted people from really several universities who come to this particular seminar. It was a huge seminar. And I mean, we spent like 2 seminar sessions fighting over the reading list. You know, which particular book of Lenin were we going to read?
Right.
This was very important. And eventually, one of my students was the leader of this revolt on campus. And they had occupied the administration building. And my class passed a resolution. These were days when these things happened in classes. They passed a resolution that we should move our class to the administration building, which was occupied. So I, obedient as always, I went, and we conducted our class in this occupied building. It was quite stunning. I should say that when I had left Cambridge and had moved to Canada, literally I'd gone to live in Nova Scotia for a couple of years. Part of the reason being is that my son Terry was just born. Mm-hmm. I was at the time very, very taken up with anarchist theories of child rearing and various things. I was reading a lot of Rousseau and so on, and thought that a pastoral environment is what my child needed. So I looked on the map and found this place and said, this is the place to go. I had a friend teaching at the Leeds at the time with me, a geographer, who, when he heard I was going to Nova Scotia, asked me if I was mad, that everybody of any interest had long left Nova Scotia and there were only sheep there. This was unkind. In fact, I went and spent 2 very pleasant years in Nova Scotia. The way I got to Cornell was rather strange. There was a colleague of mine in the Teachers' Union who was doing a dissertation on Gide, and I was helping him with it. And in the course of helping him, I came across this book by a man called Haldheim on Gide. And it turned out Haldheim was teaching, was the head of the department at Cornell. So, rather presumptuously, I wrote Haldheim a 3-page letter about his book. And he wrote me back and said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm here in Nova Scotia, I'm teaching. And so he said, well, why don't you come up to university? This was not finally what persuaded me. What persuaded me to go was a copy of the Time magazine in the period. You may recall this was the late 60s, 70s. And there was this copy of the Time magazine with this very large black student with bullets across his chest and a large gun. I didn't know at the time what it was. But he was standing at the door of the Students' Union at Cornell. I said, this sounds like a really good place. So that eventually convinced me. So I ended up at Cornell. And in those days, money was plentiful. They gave me a, bountiful fellowship. And
is that where you wrote your thesis?
I wrote my thesis there.
Now, given that sort of revolutionary context, and given that you'd already had the pastoral interlude in Nova Scotia, it does seem a very strange choice to go for Dickens.